He's a former actor, Yale grad, political commentator, Daily Wire host, and cigar aficionado. He's become one of the most popular young conservative voices in the media landscape today. He's also a devoted traditional Catholic. I recently sat down in Nashville with Michael Knowles to discuss how his origins and his faith influence his work. Here's my interview with Michael Knowles. At 7 years old, you start drawn to the theater.
Yes.
Why?
To my great shame, though I think you can empathize with me.
I completely empathize.
My whole life, I knew that I wanted to be in politics and in show business. I don't know how. Before even my earliest memories, that's just what I wanted.
Did you go to the theater as a kid? Somebody take you?
I did. I would go. I grew up in New York, so I would go see Broadway or different, shows, regional, and I really enjoyed it. But both of those things were in my head from an early age. In fact, I knew since I was a little kid I wanted to go to Yale because I felt Yale was the only place you could go and be in politics or in show business.
Or in the arts.
In the arts. It did both. And so I was always quite drawn to that. And I think many people will hear that and say, well, okay, politicians and actors have a lot in common. They're liars, they're egotistical, they're very vain.
But they shouldn't.
But they shouldn't, because at their best, acting is not lying, it's telling the truth in imaginary circumstances.
Yes.
And at their best, actors and politicians care about people. They care about character. They care about what makes human beings tick. They care about human nature.
Yeah.
And so, they're bad versions of both of those things. But at their best, I think they have a lot in common, which is why you see a lot of Ronald Reagans, Arnold Schwarzeneggers, Donald Trumps, for that matter.
Yes. Well, the showbiz is a part of connecting with people, and if you use it for good,
yes,
there's a power there. Tell me about, I saw in your biography, the Stella Adler Conservatory, where you studied as a very young person.
Yes, I was an early teenager, and I studied there, but Stella Adler was gone at this point.
Yes, yeah.
And I believe you studied with the woman herself.
Yeah, my old mentor, and torturer. Yeah, Stella,
yes.
For 3 years, I was in her last class. I think I'm the reason she had the last class, but we definitely put her away. She was a great, for those who don't, Stella Adler was kind of one of the apostles of acting technique in America. And look, the time I was studying in New York, Michael, it was at amazing. I studied, you're going to really be envious of this. I studied personally with Sandy Meisner, Uta Hagen, Stella Adler. Beatrice Straight was a dear friend of mine who did Network, won an Academy Award for Network, and taught the Chekhov technique. So to be there at that moment and see, I really did feel like a disciple to these people.
It's unbelievable, because my teacher, after the Stella Adler School, she was gone. I went back for a professional scene study with Win Handman, who he was an assistant to Meisner in the 50s. And what's funny about all these people you're naming, though, the members of the group theater, Win later, they were all basically commies or socialists.
At one point.
At one point.
Stella left, but some stayed for a long time.
Yes, and I thought it's very funny to be a conservative, but to have been trained by these people, disciples of Shaw and all of these radical left people. But I think of that training in many ways as being similar to going to a very left-wing university, which is, if you can maintain your beliefs, your core of beliefs, it's really very helpful, because it exposes you. There is not a left-wing thought that has not been presented to me, that I haven't had to consider. That's just the mainstream of the culture. And so if you can swim against the tide a little bit, you get all of the benefits of their teaching, and you also can figure out where they go a little wrong.
So Stella kind of left, I think, also the ideology behind. She was very committed to faith at the end of her life when I met her, and believed that was important for an actor to have.
And I always felt it was very helpful to have the Stella Adler technique as my bedrock, because of what you say. It was much more about the imagination. It was much more about elevating yourself up to the character. She had this great line with her theatricality and histrionic way, where she said, "There is nothing about getting dumped at prom that will help you to play the Prince of Denmark. Unless you are Danish royalty, you have to use your imagination."
Yep.
And this really, if you want to take it all the way to how we live our lives, to the moral life, this is kind of how it works. With the Strasbourg view, you just keep digging into yourself. It's all me, me, me. But the Adler view, if I hope I'm not being too, I'm not reaching too much here.
No, you're not.
Strikes me as more Aristotelian, that actually the character comes out of the habit.
Yes.
That virtue is a matter of habit, actually. And
You're a servant to the text. She always said, you are here to serve the play. The play is not here to bend to you and your petty ways.
precisely,
She's so right.
precisely.
She's so right. Then you go off to Yale. You study history, Michael. What happened to the theater? Now, I know you continued doing
Lots of
theater
plays
there.
and
You were directing plays and operas.
Yes, yeah.
I
So
mean-
I was very involved, but I was not, they didn't have a performance major. Had they had a the graduate school had the
Yes,
Yale
of
School of
course,
Drama
Yale
has the
School of Drama.
performance. But undergraduate is basically a dramaturgy degree, and I didn't want that. However, I studied history and Italian literature was my double major, and my 2 dissertations both involved the theater. My history dissertation was about Lloyd Richards and August Wilson, because they were both at Yale at the same time, and August Wilson had his cycle of Ma Rainey and all that. Fences just became a movie with Denzel Washington, another Win Handman student. He's had a better acting career than I have after Win Handman.
That's all right. You have time.
That's
He's almost out. He's playing Gladiator at this point. It's almost over.
So we had his, and then my Italian double major, the Yale department had found a play that was written by Machiavelli. People think of Machiavelli for the prince, political philosopher. He also was a playwright.
Yes.
And he wrote a famous play called The Mandrake, another one called La Clizia, but there's a lesser known one called The Girl from Andros, Landria. And it was actually an adaptation of a play by Terence, the Latin playwright, which itself was a translation of Menander's version, but we don't have that. That's
And it
lost.
had never been translated into anything but Italian?
Not for the stage. There had been some kind of literary version for English, but it was not popular. So I was able to do the first ever stage translation into English of this play. And that's how they induced me to write a thesis, is they said, well, you can do this translation, we'll give you money to put it up, and it'll be a kind of fun experience. So even though I didn't major in the theater, my 2 majors did both tie directly back to it. And even that, you think of Machiavelli, it involved show business, also very much politics. Yeah.
And then how does politics come in? So you graduate, you're working as an actor a little bit, and then there's a congresswoman in 2010.
The great Nan Hayworth.
The great Nan Hayworth, and you become her spokesman? What happened there?
Yes, so I had known Nan as a family friend since I was a kid. And Nan was running for Congress, actually while I was still in college. And something about Yale that you might have picked up from this is, you do everything but study there. So you do all sorts of extracurriculars, probably a little too much partying, and all these extracurricular activities. So I jumped on Nan's campaign. I started out as an intern, but on a congressional campaign, those campaigns are infamously short on cash, short on staff. It's a great political training ground because you get on the ground kind of nitty-gritty politics, but the issues are all federal issues, so you get national exposure. And if you have any ambition, you can rise up a campaign quickly. So I took on a more prominent role in the campaign. We were running against a guy named John Hall, who was an incumbent. He was in the band Orleans. You're still the one that all that. So one of their famous songs was "Dance with Me, I Want to Be Your Partner, Can't You See?" So we did a version, the Young Voters for an Orleans reunion tour, and that was "Vote with Me, Let's Make John Hall Leave Washington, D.C." And it got a little play, mostly because they threatened to sue us. So after that, Nan won, happily. After that, I was brought into a number of other campaigns. I really liked it. So when I was a jobbing actor in New York, doing a little bit of theater, a little bit of TV, a little bit of film, my day job, most day jobs for working actors are catering, waiting tables. Mine was working Republican campaigns, which led to one of the craziest experiences. I auditioned for a role in New York, and they said, "Do you speak any other languages?" And I said, "Well, I have Italian, touch of French." And I joked. I said, "Oh, and I have Esperanto." I'd studied it a little bit in high school. And I said, "That probably won't be very useful." And they said, "No, actually it will." The other casting director says, "Will it?" He says, "Yes, client number 1 speaks Esperanto." I said, "Your client's George Soros." She said, "He is. How'd you know that?" I said, "Because there are about 5 people on earth who speak Esperanto, and he's the biggest one. Wow. He's the only one with the money to cast something." They were casting actors to play sommelier and caterers at his wedding, his 3rd wedding. And they cast me. And I said, "This is the craziest thing. I've worked Republican campaigns at this point for years." There were people there, you know, Nancy Pelosi, Samantha Power, Bono was there, all these big liberal figures. And it actually gave me some comfort because I said, the fact that they hired me to do this job, they
Of
could
all
have
the
Googled
people.
me. Yes, I said, perhaps George Soros doesn't actually control the whole world.
In the way we imagine.
That's
It's
right.
a little more limited, just the Upper West Side. But
Exactly.
it's okay, but it's good real estate.
Yes.
It's amazing. So you go, tell me about this though. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. Andrew Klavan has a show.
Yeah, even before he had a show.
Before you had you were friends with his son or worked with his son Spencer, right?
Yes, I
Yeah,
was
Yale.
in college. I directed him in opera. We lived in the same dorm.
Is that how you met Andrew?
Yes, and I was a fan of Andrew, and I knew Spencer. I was friends with Spencer.
Yeah.
And somehow I didn't put the two together. Klavan's not a very popular last name, but I didn't put it together. He calls me up one day. He says, Michael, my father wants a little help with his communications. Could you help out? You're the only guy I know in conservative politics and show business. I said, sure, okay. And so we met and became fast friends. And it's all kind of providential, I guess. I was planning to move to LA, do more film work or TV work. Drew was moving down from Santa Barbara to LA. We were going to move there around the same time. So I was working with him. That was another one of my day jobs. In fact, I had to write like him. I had to learn to write like him for social media and things like that. And so we end up there. There was a group out there at the time called the Friends of Abe, a secret society, so secret it had a Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Very
and regular postings in the LA Times.
exactly.
But yes. Yeah.
So I was part of that group, conservatives in show business, and the head of the group at the time was Jeremy Boring. They were putting together first a group called Truth Social, which became the Daily Wire, and I was banging around there. But when Jeremy asked me to join the Daily Wire, I was going to be the pizza boy number 3 or something of the Daily Wire. There were 5 employees. He said, "Do you want the job?" And so I said, "Okay, that's fine." We do it. The election day, 2016. I was wrapping. It was the last day of principal photography on a very low budget movie, but one that I had the lead role in. And I really felt like the dog that caught the car. This is great. I'm in LA. I get to make this movie, albeit with a low budget. And I drove back to the Daily Wire. We did election coverage that night. And I did find something odd, which was when I was on set, when I was actually on the happy occasions I was working as an actor, I was thinking about, oh, boy, wouldn't it be fun to be at the Daily Wire in politics. I was thinking about my day job. So that's very odd. And we go there. The Daily Wire at that point was so small, but it was gaining a lot of steam. Trump wins, and I publish a joke book called Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a
A
comprehensive
New
guide.
York Times best-selling joke book, #1.
A #1 national best-selling joke
Yes.
book, but I have to correct you, Raymond.
Yes.
The fake news New York Times would not give me my listing. They did not consider my book to be a real book.
Oh, well.
Now, and they might have had a point actually on that
It
one.
missed a few words, but other
yes.
than words, it was a book.
And it had a great epigraph from Thucydides at the beginning. It said, "This is not a work to win the applause of the moment, but a contribution for all time."
And tell people the title of the book.
Reasons to Vote for Democrats, of course.
And the
a
internals
comprehensive
of the
guide,
book
yes.
are?
Totally blank, totally blank. And so the Times had a point on that, I guess. But we just launched Daily Wire, and we put it out there, and this thing is jumping up the charts. It's number 20 on all of Amazon, number 10, number 5. Fox News calls, asks me to go on the morning show on Fox and Friends. I said, okay, that's kind of a funny bit. I go on, and by the end of the hit, it's #1 in the country. Major publishers get into a bidding war for the rights to nothing. They wanted to buy the rights from me to nothing. I sold it to them.
So,
Jeremy insisted I make them pay a lot of money because it was only funny if they paid a lot of
Yeah,
money.
that's right, for nothing.
Yes, exactly. And then, but they killed the publicity on it because they didn't want me to make fun of them for paying a lot of money for nothing. They didn't get the joke, So Fox invites me back on. They want to get it back up there. And I said, well, I've already done the joke about the blank book, so we got to do something else. And they interviewed me about Trump's Syria policy or something. So I said, well, look, I'm relieved to have a good president who has a coherent foreign policy now. Well, what do you know? President Covfefe, the great man himself, was watching his favorite morning show. He sees this, and he tweets out an endorsement. A great book for your reading enjoyment, Reasons to Vote for Democrats by Michael Knowles. Jumps right back up to the top of the charts, and then the Daily Wire gives me a show. I think I'm the only show host in history who got his show for not writing a book.
How did that transition work for you? I mean, because it's one thing to work on other people's shows. It's one thing to be a guest on a show. When you're carrying the freight, it's hard.
I was really pleased, in retrospect,
Yeah.
that I did not get my show until I was I 27? So I was still pretty young.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm glad I didn't get a show at 22. I'm really glad I didn't get a show at 18. A lot of kids these days, because the barrier to entry is even lower than it was when I started.
Yeah. What role does faith play in all this? I know you fell away from your faith for a time.
Yeah.
We all have that experience. What brought you back?
I fell away at 13. I fell away at my confirmation.
Oh.
This was 2003. So this was the church scandals, the new atheists, Christopher Hitchens and all those seducers who were Sam Harris and them. Their message was perfectly tailored for a punk 13-year-old boy who thought he was smarter than he was.
Right, with somebody who's smart and read. If you read, they're convincing on the page.
They're convincing. They're good prose writers, but they're probably not as convincing for a 23-year-old who reads, or a 33-year-old. But for a 13-year-old, they got him. And so I had just the right amount of hubris. There was scandal in the church. I had some wonderful catechism teachers personally, but catechesis broadly in the 1990s was very, very weak. And I would say the reforms that followed the Second Vatican Council did not achieve liturgically, I think, what they were trying to achieve. I'm trying to be diplomatic about it.
Liturgically? How about seminarians, baptisms, marriages, confirmations, confession? I could go on.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
It's all kind of a nosedive.
I remember when I was convinced that God exists because a friend of mine who was cradle Catholic, grew up megachurch Protestant, fell away from the faith around the same time I did. Now he's reverted to the Catholic Church. He and I kind of did it together.
Many years ago, my wife was not Catholic and had read and absorbed all the propaganda about the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Whore Babylon, and they worship saints and plaster saints and they're crazy people and why Mary, all of that. And I took her to Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, where Cardinal O'Connor at the time was holding forth, and he was impressive. And the power of his faith and his oratory cut through, but it didn't seal the deal. It wasn't until I took her to the Latin Mass in Washington, D.C., Old St. Mary's, which no longer has the Latin Mass.
As I recently learned this past weekend, in fact, when I tried to go.
Oh, yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
And this was a bastion. In fact, the Mass never stopped there, but it stopped now. Before we talk about that, which I do want to talk about, what is it, do you think, drawing young people to the Latin Mass at a time when Rome seems determined to stamp it out?
It should not be surprising that the Mass, which formed statistically all of the saints ever, just about, would have some pull on people. It is a beautiful liturgy. And in the deformations that followed, perhaps for good intentions, but that followed the Second Vatican Council, so much beauty was ripped away for really weak reasoning. The iconoclasm that destroyed so many churches after the Council, after the reforms that followed the Council, because we have to distinguish between the Council and
and what happened
reforms.
afterwards.
Yes, I'm 18 or 19. I'm in Italy for a summer abroad. And I said, well, look, I'm not faithful anymore, but I'll go to the Vatican. I want to see a Latin Mass, or I want to see a Mass.
A Mass.
This is after the motu proprio from Pope Benedict XVI. And the Latin Mass kicks in. And I had never experienced anything like this before.
Oh, you'd never been before?
No, I didn't know what it was.
Wow.
I knew the church used to speak in Latin in the old-timey days.
Yeah.
That's all I knew.
Yeah.
I went up, I was not in a state of grace, didn't even occur to me to go to confession. I went up to receive our Lord in the Eucharist, and I'm standing there with my hands. I was taught in catechism.
This is the way they taught.
This is how you do
receive. Yeah.
And whoever, it was a man with a red hat, so it was a pretty serious fellow there who was
cardinal.
Who was a cardinal who was administering the Holy Communion, and he didn't move. I'm waiting. I said, "Am I doing something? It's been a while, I guess." And I went to ask him what I was doing wrong, and he placed the Eucharist on my tongue. I said, "Oh, okay." And so I said, "Wow, that was odd. I wonder why." Oh, okay. I put it out of my head. At this point, though, you can find the traditional Latin Mass. I noticed it in New York, here and there. And even in the Novus Ordo, wonderful, my old parish, Church of St. Michael in New York, there was a wonderful, very reverent
Novus Ordo.
Novus Ordo.
With Latin, the way it was envisioned, the way the council envisioned it.
Yes.
It wasn't to stamp out Latin or remove chant.
Yes.
It was to bring a little more vernacular into the Mass.
Right. Which
became a runaway train.
Why are the young people drawn to the traditional Latin Mass? Because we want truth. We've grown up in an age in which we were taught from diapers that there is no truth, or if there is a truth, we can't really know anything about it.
I am always amazed when I travel, no matter where I travel. The Latin Mass, it's never in the glitziest, big, beautiful, places. No. It's in little chapels. Now it's, of course, it's practically underground.
Yes.
It's practically underground. But packed with people and screaming babies and women and their children. It's a beautiful sight. It's the future of the church. It's the family.
It is the future of the church. It literally is.
Yeah.
In my traditional Latin Mass parish, the median age is about 8 because of all the kids.
I've been to that parish, I know.
It's a small, people crawling over each other practically. Even if you took the kids out, though, probably the median age would be about 30.
Yeah, very young.
Maybe, and so I find I travel a lot, and I will go to Novus Ordo masses when I travel sometimes, and I can't help but notice that the median age in those masses is about 102, and the median age in the traditional Latin Mass, the supposedly stodgy Mass pushing the youth away, is much, much younger. And so it's above my pay grade, of course, to question the cardinals or the bishops. But when I hear bishops inveigh against the traditional liturgy or discourage even reverent practices in the liturgy because they want to bring the youth back into the pews, I think, I actually have a little bit of experience as a youth, and it would seem to me that if you really wanted to bring some aggiornamento to the church, in the spirit of accompaniment, in the spirit even of synodality, perhaps, perhaps we ought to listen to what the laity want, and what the laity want is tradition and reverence and beauty.
In their determination to stamp out, stop, outlaw, ban what is a beautiful, holy expression of worship of God. Why would you ever want to stop that?
Well, there's something fitting about the traditional liturgies being driven underground by these very bishops. I think of Henry VIII, when he goes in, destroys Canterbury Cathedral, tears down such beautiful icons, steals all the land. So the Protestants got all the good churches, and the Catholics went underground. And the deformations that occurred to the liturgy after the Second Vatican Council, in many ways, the purpose was to make the Mass more Protestant, and that was supposed to bring people into the church, even though it didn't work. And so once again, we have these Protestant rites, or seemingly Protestant rites, cropping up, and once again, the Mass of the Ages is driven underground. But it is in that struggle, it is in that oppression, to use a popular word, that often the church flourishes. This is why we say, and the cardinals know this well, they wear the colored slippers, that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church.
Let's talk culturally about this political moment. I want to bring all this together, because the faith is bound up in this. Trump's victory, I don't see that as an isolated political victory. It feels like that was also a cultural shift rather than a party winning. Something is happening. What do you think is happening there? What is that a manifestation of?
Certainly you're right that this is a major cultural movement. You just look even at the demographics who shifted over this cycle. 46% of Hispanics, that's a shocking number. 1 in 5 black men. Republicans hadn't seen anything like that in a long time. 40% of women under the age of 30. This is the group of people supposedly most likely to vote for Kamala. 40% voted for Trump. Some major, major movement has happened. This is a reaction to kitchen table issues. Inflation is really bad. Immigration is not only leads to criminality, but it's just deeply offensive that we're told we're not allowed to enforce the most basic aspects of our law. A nation without a border isn't a nation. There's nothing that delineates it from other nations. So that's just deeply offensive to people. But one issue has dominated discourse more than any other, and that is the transgender ideology. And the liberals are so confused about this. They say, why this minor, seemingly trivial issue? Why do you conservatives want to make this such a big deal? I say, first of all, I'm not the one who forced the women to use the bathroom with the men. I'm not the one, I was happy with the way things were. You're the innovators. You're the cultural revolutionaries. But why is this such a big deal? Because it's so offensive to our intelligence. Everyone knows that a man cannot really be a woman. Everyone knows at a deep level. To tell us that is to make us look like idiots, and to force us to accede to this ideology is to force us to lie. And people really don't want to be forced to lie. And to say that a man is really a woman, that a big husky fellow in a dress really could use the bathroom with a little girl, that tells you that a party has lost the common sense. And if they don't possess the judgment to discern between man and woman. They probably don't possess the judgment for much of anything else.
This is a major, something is, the ground is shifting, and I'm not sure people are fully aware of what's happening and what's next.
Well, you have to look at what happened on Election Day, because it's not just that Trump won.
Yeah.
He won in a massive electoral college landslide. He won the popular vote as a Republican for the first time in 20 years. He won huge numbers of people, demographics that he was told he could not win. This was not particularly close. This was an absolute cataclysm for the left. And so the unwise and imprudent leftists just double down. They say, well, everyone's racist and sexist. Oh, good luck. Campaign on that. You're all evil. Vote for us. But the wise leftists are just left confused and crestfallen, because they say, I guess we were just wrong. Most of the country rejected us. Perhaps there's an error in our thinking. And Trump really, I think, is a wonderful figure for this, in part because he's not particularly ideological. Right. There are right-wing ideologues just as there are left-wing ideologues, but Trump is not ideological. He is a gut politician. His gut is quite good. He's a politician who recognizes what Aristotle would say is the paramount political virtue, which is prudence. When he's asked questions about trade, when he's asked questions about immigration, when he's asked questions about transgender bathrooms, his answer is usually, well, what works? What worked before? What had we been doing? What does the wisdom of the ages have to tell us? That's a good guiding principle. And so he was able to claim the middle ground. He was able to claim the central territory.
Yeah. What is the role of the Knowles show going forward in this time? How do you see it? Will it shift at all? Will it change at all?
It will not change, but it will become, I hope, more of what it is. I hope that it deepens. And part of that is, going back to our friend Aristotle, it's not enough to just understand the virtues. You have to live the virtues. And I think this applies in political philosophy as well.
Yeah.
We move in time and space.
And we need each other, and you need to be in rooms with it. That's why I came here, by the way, to interview you and didn't do it via satellite. I hate satellite interviews. I do them because you have to, because of the nature of what we're in. I much prefer this. You can't get a feel for people through the screen. You know this. We're often confined to these screens. There is something, well, incarnational.
Yes.
It goes back to what we're talking about earlier. The Latin Mass has its own incarnational reality.
Yes.
I think we're deprived of that in everyday life, which is maybe another reason why that Mass is so powerful.
So much of the smells and bells were stripped away as unnecessary, superfluous. But they're not so. I guess to determine if something's superfluous, you have to ask, what are we doing? And so the Mass is the representation of the Holy Sacrifice. You know, this is the highest form of prayer. This is a peek into heaven. A mystical reading of the book of the Apocalypse shows you what's happening.
There it is, in living in Technicolor.
That's right. It's in 3 dimensions and in Technicolor. And so, and you even think about our kind of faith. Our faith is different from other religions because the Gospels are not poetry primarily. They're not philosophy primarily. They're journalism. They're a description of events that happened in real life. And our Lord gave to us not just some words on paper. He gave us a church led by real men who went out to all the corners of the world to make disciples of all nations. And that living body, mystical body of Christ is with us today. It means we got to put our bodies into it. You know, this is why sacramentals are so helpful. This is why the sacraments are crucial. You know, our Lord comes into time and space. And so we need to recognize we live in time and space. This is why I like to do live events. Some of my friends and colleagues, they don't want to do as many live speeches and events. It's kind of a hassle.
Yeah.
You know, you want to be with your family and your kids.
And you get protests.
I get occasionally burned in effigy.
Well,
it goes with the territory.
Yeah.
But I love them because we're incarnate creatures. This is where you really reach people. Even I have a little side project, which is my cigar company, Mayflower Cigars. Part of it is I like cigars. I think the body is a temple. The temple needs incense.
And by the way, your cigar company, tell everybody what the name of the cigar company is and explain why.
The company is called Mayflower Cigars. This might raise some eyebrows. Just the Mayflower.
Mayflower from this Italian?
Yes, it doesn't make any sense. My father, the Knowles side, not the Italian side, the Knowles side, they go back to the Mayflower. We had 6 ancestors on the Mayflower. They were extremely Protestant and puritanical and are probably spinning in their graves that their descendant is a mackerel-snapping papist. Well, I mean, everyone raised tobacco and they got, they built the country. But I wanted something patriotic, something historical, but not just, guns and flags and cowboy boot cigars. I wanted it to have a little more history, maybe a little bit more elevated. So the Mayflower is good. Yeah. Well, on the one hand, it's very aristocratic. On the other, these people were rascals, and they were booted out of England, and they were, half of them died in their first winter here, and it was a tough, hardy life.
Sturdy people.
Cigars are a great equalizer. You go to any cigar lounge, you are likely to find a CEO and a construction worker having a great conversation. I mean, it just brings so many people together. Now, the other little hint about this, which I'll let the Catholics in on, is the symbol is a triangle, which comes from the Mayflower II ship, but also, it's got kind of Trinitarian symbolism. And then the flower, it could be a Mayflower, it could be a Jacobite rose. How subversive, is the Catholic imagery here? I'll leave it to you to decide.
We'll leave it to interpretation. We'll do another show on decoding the flower. Michael Knowles, always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Save me a cigar next time.
I certainly will.
You can find out more about Michael Knowles at michaeljknowles.com.